The woman I loved, the one I built a life with, sat across from me and delivered an ultimatum so cold, it echoed the death knell of everything we'd ever shared. 7 days, she told me, to sign over my dead father's trust, or she would burn our world to the ground. Fluorescent kitchen lights hummed, casting long, stark shadows across our quiet kitchen. Outside, the Rochester winter was a silent, biting cold, but the chill that settled in my bones was from inside, from the words Chloe had just spoken. The air itself felt thin, charged with an unspoken threat, and all I could hear was the frantic thump of my own heart against my ribs. I'm Ethan. A man who, at 33, runs a small snow removal and hardscape company out of Greece, just north of Rochester, New York. Winters, we're out there, plowing and salting commercial lots. Warmer months, we're building retaining walls and laying patios. I've got 3 crews, a fleet of trucks that are more character than reliable, and a payroll that gives me nightmares every other Friday. I started this thing at 24 with 1 beat-up truck and a leaf blower. No handouts, no trust funds, just grit and calloused hands. Everything I have, I built, or fixed, or fought for. It's not glamorous work. You're up at 3 a.m. in a whiteout, hands raw, phone buzzing, diesel bills threatening to swallow you whole. But it's *mind star. And up until about 6 months ago, I thought Chloe, my wife, respected that. Turns out, I was wrong about a lot of things. But I was spectacularly wrong about that. Chloe, a realtor broker associate, sat there that Tuesday night, her hands folded primly on the table. She looked like she was closing a multimillion-dollar deal, not ending a marriage. She's good at what she does, reading a room, controlling a conversation, making you think her decision was yours all along. And she was doing it to me. She laid out her terms. If I didn't add her name to the trust accounts and the LLC documentation tied to my father's estate by the following Tuesday, she was filing for divorce. No shouting, no tears, just a timeline and a consequence. She even had a printed list of accounts she wanted access to, meticulously organized, color-coded tabs. She'd done her homework. Or so she thought. It wasn't the demand that hit me, not at first. It was the clinical presentation. She'd rehearsed this. She had talking points, referencing equitable distribution under New York law like she'd been speed-reading divorce statutes between open houses. She mentioned marital assets acquired during the marriage 3 times in 5 minutes. She even used the phrase fiduciary duty to the partnership, a legal fiction in marriage, but it sounded impressive enough to her. I just sat there, listening, nodding occasionally. I asked if she was sure. She met my gaze, unwavering. I've never been more sure of anything, she said, her voice a flat line. Then she leaned forward, tapped the list with a perfectly manicured finger, and said, "This isn't something we're going to discuss, Ethan. Tuesday, or my attorney makes the call Wednesday morning." She got up then, walked into the living room, and fired up her laptop. Like we'd just finished discussing the internet bill. Here's what Chloe didn't know. I'd already talked to Sarah Thompson, the CPA who administers the trust, 3 times that month. Sarah had walked me through every scenario, confirming that what Chloe was demanding was legally impossible. Not difficult, not unlikely. *impossible star. But I didn't say any of that. I just sat at that kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she'd been, the cold dread starting to spread. My wife had just given me a deadline to hand over money that wasn't mine to give. Money my dad had specifically set up so that nobody could ever do exactly what she was trying to do. 7 days. Fine. I could work with 7 days. The thing about running a snow removal business in Rochester is, you learn to plan for storms before they hit. You watch the radar. You stage equipment. You pre-salt the lots. You get ahead of it. Chloe had just told me a storm was coming, and she had no idea I'd been watching the radar for weeks. My dad, Richard, had died 7 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. He was 61. He'd spent his entire adult life in Rochester, working in facilities management, and quietly building something none of us fully understood until he was gone. He bought things, a storage unit complex, a half-acre lot leased to a cell tower company, a duplex he rented out for years without ever raising the rent by more than $50. He drove a truck older than mine, wore the same 3 flannels. Most people, including Chloe, assumed he was just a regular guy. That was the point. When he got the diagnosis, he called me, not to cry, but to make sure I had Sarah Thompson's number and understood what would happen. He'd set everything up years earlier with David Chen, an estate attorney specializing in asset protection for small family estates. Everything Dad owned was held inside 2 layers: a family LLC that owned the actual real estate and lease agreements, and an irrevocable trust that owned the LLC membership interests. The trust had an independent trustee. It had a spendthrift clause that specifically blocked any beneficiary spouse from accessing, claiming, or petitioning for any portion of the principal or distribution. Every dollar that came out was classified as a restricted gift for approved expenses only. Not income. Not marital property. Not divisible in any proceeding. Dad didn't do this because he was paranoid. He did it because he watched his older brother, my Uncle Robert, lose almost everything in a divorce back in 2011. Robert's ex-wife got the rental properties, the savings, half the retirement. He ended up in a 1-bedroom apartment, eating cereal for dinner at 58. Dad never talked about it much, but every time Robert's name came up, his jaw would tighten. He decided it was never going to happen to his kid. He built the structure, never telling me the details, hoping I'd never need it. The estate meeting was 3 weeks after the funeral. Sarah set it up at her office. Chloe came with me, assuming she should, and I didn't stop her. The numbers weren't Manhattan level, but on paper, Dad's estate was valued at roughly $1.8 million, mostly tied up in the LLC assets. Not liquid cash. Just property and leases generating steady, modest returns. This wasn't grab and spend money. It was built to hold and grow. I watched Chloe during that meeting. She was quiet, but her eyes moved, scanning documents, flipping pages ahead of Sarah's explanations, stopping on the numbers. When Sarah said $1.8 million, Chloe's posture changed. She sat up straighter. Her hand found my knee under the table, but it wasn't for comfort. It was a claim. In the car after the meeting, she was already talking timelines. When does the money transfer? Can we access it this month? Should we look at refinancing the house? Chloe, I said, we rent. We don't own the house. I know that, Ethan. That's the point. Now we can buy. She started naming neighborhoods, Pittsford specifically. She knew the listings, the school districts. A vision, fully formed, before we'd even pulled out of the parking lot. A vision funded entirely by money she didn't understand and couldn't touch. I tried to tell her it wasn't that simple, that the money was locked in a structure. She nodded, but she wasn't listening. She was already building a life in her head that didn't exist. That was the beginning. And I should have said more right then. But I loved her. So I didn't. The next 4 months were a slow, grinding pressure campaign. Chloe ran it like she was trying to convince a reluctant seller to take a lowball offer. She didn't scream or throw things. She was too smart for that. She worked angles. She started spending differently. New clothes. Frequent. Upgraded her car lease without telling me. Dropping comments about houses for sale in Pittsford like she was just making conversation. Except every house she mentioned was listed above $600,000. She'd leave her laptop open on Zillow with saved searches filtered by price, the minimum always set to $550,000. Then came the social pressure. She started telling her friends and family that I was sitting on money and refusing to share it. I found this out because her sister, Olivia, called me one night, asking if everything was okay. Olivia said Chloe told her I'd inherited over $1 million and was keeping it in a secret account. Olivia wasn't hostile. She sounded genuinely concerned. But the fact that Chloe was building a narrative outside our house told me everything I needed to know about her strategy. Classic realtor move. Control the listing description before the buyer ever walks through the door. She weaponized social situations. We went to a couple's dinner at her friend's house in mid-January, and Chloe waited until the table was full, everyone mid-conversation, to say loudly enough that every head turned, "It must be nice to marry someone and then find out they think generosity only goes one direction." Dead silence. Everyone stared at their plates. The host tried to change the subject. Chloe smiled at me across the table with that tight little smile she uses when she's testing a boundary. I finished my food, thanked the hosts, and drove home without saying a word. She called me dramatic when we got back. I called it a preview. The host texted me the next day, saying they'd rather not be in the middle of things. Fair enough. But that was a couple we'd spent Thanksgiving with for 2 years running, gone overnight, because Chloe turned a dinner table into a stage. These people were props to her. Always were. One night in January, I got home late from a salt run, around 10 p.m. Chloe was at the kitchen counter with a stack of paperwork, joint account modification forms, beneficiary change requests, trust amendment templates she'd downloaded from some legal website that had nothing to do with our actual trust structure. She slid them across the counter with a pen on top, like I was a client at a closing. Just sign these so we can move forward. I looked at the forms, then at her. I picked up the pen, put it in the drawer, and told her I wasn't signing anything she downloaded off the internet. She called me selfish. I called it Tuesday. The forms showed up on the counter again the next morning. And the morning after that. I started putting them in my truck and shredding them at the shop. The week before the ultimatum, Chloe crossed a line that made everything personal. She went to my shop on a Saturday morning when only Kevin was around, prepping equipment for a Monday job. She told him she was picking something up for me, walked into my office, and spent 20 minutes going through my desk. Kevin didn't stop her because she was my wife, and he didn't know any better. But he told me about it that night. I drove to the shop and checked. She'd gone through the business bank statements, vendor invoices, and a folder I kept with printed trust correspondence. She didn't take anything, but she'd taken photos. I could tell because she'd left a document face down that I always kept face up, and the filing cabinet drawer wasn't closed all the way. She thought she was finding evidence of hidden assets. What she was actually photographing was proof that the trust and the business were completely separate from our marital finances. She was loading her own trap, and she had no idea. Monday morning, I changed the office lock, added a deadbolt, and told Kevin that Chloe wasn't allowed past the front counter, no matter what she said or what excuse she used. He just nodded and wrote it on the whiteboard next to the route schedule. The Friday after the ultimatum, I had payroll due. 3 crews, 7 guys total, plus Kevin on salary. Gross payroll was about $14,200 every 2 weeks, run out of the business checking account. I'd been running payroll like this for 6 years without a single miss. In Rochester in January, when you're running close at 4 a.m. and your hands are cracked and your back is screaming, that Friday deposit is the only thing keeping guys showing up Monday morning. Here's where I need to explain something that's going to make me sound stupid. 2 years earlier, when we were in a good place and I was slammed during a massive storm week, I added Chloe as a secondary authorized signer on the business checking account. Just for emergency. She was supposed to be able to make a deposit or handle a payment if I was unreachable during a 72-hour storm cycle. She never used it. I forgot it was even set up until Wednesday of payroll week. I logged into the business account to verify the balance before the payroll service pulled funds Thursday night. The account was short. Not a little short. Missing $9,400. I went through the transaction history line by line, and there it was, an online transfer initiated Monday afternoon, routed from the business checking to our joint personal account. The login came from the saved credentials on our shared home desktop. Chloe had used the authorized signer access I'd given her 2 years ago to move $9,400 out of my business account 3 days before payroll. I had 2 days to cover a $14,200 payroll with $4,800 left. And payroll wasn't my only bill that week. I had a $2,800 parts invoice coming due. Fuel costs, salt orders. The business doesn't stop running because your wife is draining your accounts. I could not miss payroll. That was non-negotiable. My guys would walk. My contracts would collapse. My reputation, the only thing that keeps commercial accounts calling me back every winter, would be finished. In this business, you miss one payroll, and the word spreads faster than lake-effect snow hits the thruway. I sat in my truck in the shop parking lot for about 10 minutes after I found the transaction. Engine running, heat blasting, staring at the bank app on my phone like the numbers might rearrange themselves into something workable. They didn't. So I started making calls. I called Kevin first. Told him the account was short and what happened. The line went quiet for a second, then he said, "You miss Friday? Half those guys don't come back. Not next week. Not ever." "I know," I said, my voice tight. "That's why I'm calling you first." He didn't say much after that. Just asked what he could do. I told him I needed to sell the backup plow, the 2009 Western V-Plow, worth about $4,500 in good condition. I listed it that afternoon on a local equipment group for $3,200 because I needed it gone by Thursday. The first guy who called offered me $2,000. I said no. Second guy wanted to come look at it Saturday. I told him it wouldn't be here Saturday. The Batavia guy called at 4 p.m., asked one question about the cutting edge, and said he'd be there by 7 with cash. Done. I watched him load it onto his trailer in the dark, knowing my wife had just cost me my only redundancy in the middle of a Rochester winter for leverage in a divorce she was going to lose. Selling that plow hurt. We still had February and March to get through. Next, I called my equipment vendor and asked to delay the $2,800 parts invoice by 2 weeks. He agreed, but slapped on a $180 late fee and told me it couldn't happen again, or he'd put me on prepay only. That would have cost me thousands over the season. Then I logged into the joint account to pull the $9,400 back. Except it wasn't all there. Chloe had already burned through about $3,000 of it. Attorney retainer. Probably. I transferred back every dollar that was left and put it into the business account. Between what I recovered from the joint, the plow cash, and the delayed invoice, payroll cleared Friday morning. Barely. My guys got paid, but I was out a $4,500 plow. I'd burned goodwill with my vendor, and the joint checking was nearly empty. First thing I did after payroll cleared was call the bank, revoke Chloe's authorized signer status, change every password, and enable two-factor authentication on every account tied to the business. Should have done that months ago. Lesson learned, the expensive way. Chloe had already retained a divorce attorney. His name was Brendan Riley. I got served the following Monday, a full day before her own deadline had even expired. She was never waiting for Tuesday. The ultimatum was just a formality. I stood in my shop holding the papers, snow melting off my boots onto the concrete floor, and read through the filing. She was claiming equitable distribution of all marital and quasi-marital assets, including inherited assets received during the marriage. Her estimated value of the contested estate was listed as $1.8 million, and she was requesting no less than $700,000 as her equitable share. $700,000 from a trust she couldn't touch, controlled by a trustee she'd never met, protected by a structure built specifically to stop people like her. I folded the papers, put them in my desk drawer, and called Sarah. Discovery started in early February. Brendan Riley came out swinging. He subpoenaed bank records, business financials, trust documents, LLC operating agreements, everything. Sarah and David responded with a wall of documentation that said the same thing on every page. The trust is irrevocable, the beneficiary has no legal title or control, and spousal claims are explicitly excluded. But Riley kept pushing. He filed motions to compel additional disclosure. He argued the trust was a sham, that I had de facto control, that distributions constituted marital income. Every motion got denied or withdrawn after Sarah's team responded, but each one cost time and money. My legal fees were climbing, and I was spending hours assembling documents and responding to interrogatories while trying to run a business in the middle of Rochester's heaviest snow season in 4 years. There was 1 week where I drove from a job site to Sarah's office, back to a job site, then to a hearing, then back to dispatch, all in the same day. I ate a gas station sandwich in a courthouse parking garage and called it lunch. Something about Riley's approach didn't add up, though. He referenced things in filings that were oddly specific. Details about my schedule, my habits, where I kept paperwork at the shop. He described the inside of my office once, referencing documents stored in an unsecured filing cabinet in the respondent's commercial workspace. That's a weirdly specific detail for a man who's never set foot in my shop. He also referenced a vendor payment schedule that matched our actual billing cycle almost exactly, Not an estimate, the actual dates. Either Riley had a forensic accountant going harder than Discovery required, or someone was feeding him information directly. Then, one Thursday evening in late February, Kevin was finishing a late salt run on a commercial lot in Henrietta and saw Chloe's car parked at a restaurant on East Henrietta Road. Except when he swung back past the same lot an hour later on his return route, Chloe was standing in the parking lot next to a dark sedan. The guy she was with had his hand on the small of her back while she leaned against the passenger door. Kevin said it wasn't the posture of two people wrapping up a business meeting. He didn't think much of it until the following Thursday. Same restaurant. Same time window. This time, Kevin pulled into the lot to check a route notification on his phone and got a clear look. The guy walking Chloe to his car was Brendan Riley. Kevin recognized him from the preliminary hearing 2 weeks earlier. Same build, same haircut, same. Watch, he'd been fidgeting with the entire time in court. I didn't react when Kevin told me. I asked him to write down the dates, times, and what he saw. He did. Then a third piece fell into place without me even looking for it. A buddy of mine named Mark, who does commercial HVAC work, called me the following weekend about a job referral. At the end of the conversation, totally unprompted, he mentioned he'd seen Chloe coming out of a law office on East Avenue the previous Saturday morning, except the office had been closed. Mark knew because he serviced the building's HVAC system, and the weekend lockout schedule was posted in the lobby. Chloe came out a side entrance with a guy Mark didn't recognize, and they got into the same car. I didn't tell Mark what it meant. I just thanked him for the referral and hung up. But I wrote down the date, the time, and what he said. Then I pulled Chloe's financial disclosure from Discovery, which included itemized payments to Riley's office with dates and service descriptions. 6 late conference sessions over a 2-month period, all billed at evening hours, all on Thursdays. The billing matched Kevin's sightings down to the day of the week. Who schedules client conferences at 8:30 p.m. on a Thursday? Nobody who's keeping it professional. I told Sarah. She went quiet for about 10 seconds. Then she said, an attorney in a personal relationship with a client during active litigation has an ethical conflict that could get him sanctioned or disbarred. She asked if I wanted to file a formal grievance. I told her, not yet. I didn't want to blow it up prematurely and give Riley a chance to spin it or withdraw cleanly. Sarah flagged the pattern with the court quietly, not as a weapon, but as an ethical concern. The kind of thing that makes a judge start side-eyeing everything that lawyer files after that. Riley didn't know we knew. Chloe didn't know we knew. But the ground under their strategy had just turned to sand, and they were still stomping around on it like it was concrete. 2 weeks after Discovery started, Chloe made her next move, setting it up like a staging appointment before a listing. She waited until I got home late from a dispatch night after a truck breakdown on one of the routes. She was standing in the kitchen, her phone face down on the counter, and she started in on the trust again. Same demands, same rehearsed calm, but this time she blocked the hallway when I tried to walk past her to the bedroom. I stopped. I told her to move. She didn't. She asked me if I was going to make her move. She said it loud, louder than the conversation needed. I looked down and saw the edge of her phone screen glowing. She was recording. She raised her voice another notch and said, "Why won't you just talk to me about this? All I'm asking for is a conversation, and you keep shutting me out." I kept my voice flat. "I'm not doing this tonight. Step aside, please." She didn't move. I stepped backward. I put my hands in my jacket pockets, turned around, and walked out the front door. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 40 minutes until she went to bed. That was the whole incident, but it was enough for Riley. 3 days later, Chloe filed a sworn statement claiming she felt unsafe in the home due to my erratic and controlling behavior regarding finances. Attached was a partial audio clip from that night, starting from where I told her to step aside, without the part where she blocked the hallway and escalated first. It sounded tense. Riley also attached a text exchange between Chloe and Olivia from that same night where Chloe wrote that she was scared of what he might do, about 6 minutes after I'd already been sitting silently in my truck outside. New York courts take safety claims seriously at the temporary order stage, and the standard for granting one is low. The judge issued exclusive occupancy to Chloe for 30 days pending a hearing. I had 48 hours to gather my personal belongings and leave. I packed 2 duffel bags, slow and quiet. I wasn't going to give her another audio clip. Chloe watched me pack from the hallway with her arms crossed. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I stayed at Kevin's place the first week. His wife, Jessica, set up the spare bedroom and didn't ask questions. Kevin and I ran morning dispatches from his kitchen table. The second week, I moved into the shop. I set up a cot in the back office behind the parts shelving, hung a curtain for some privacy, and used the industrial sink in the equipment bay to wash up. It was February in Rochester, and the shop's heating system was designed to keep pipes from freezing, not to keep a grown man warm at night. I wore 2 layers to sleep and kept a space heater running until the electric bill made me rethink that decision. One morning, a client dropped off a check at 7 a.m., and I had to scramble off the cot, kick the sleeping bag behind the shelving, and get to the front counter before he walked past the office door. I'm not going to lie. 2 a.m. on a cot 6 feet from a rack of plow blades hits different. Asterisk, you built this place. You own it. And somehow you're sleeping in it like a squatter because a woman who blocked a hallway and pressed record convinced a judge you were the threat. Asterisk, that thought sat with me every single night. The snow still fell. The clients still called. One night, we had an 8-inch dump that started at midnight, and I was on the phone non-stop until 6 a.m., dispatching crews from a folding chair in a shop that smelled like diesel and cold concrete. Rerouting trucks when a driver called in with a transmission issue. Arguing with a salt supplier about a delayed delivery that was going to throw off the entire overnight window for my biggest commercial account. Kevin covered everything I couldn't physically get to, and he never once complained. Meanwhile, Chloe was using the time to build her story. She posted on social media about starting fresh and protecting her peace. She told mutual friends I'd been removed from the home because of what he did, leaving the details vague enough that people filled in the worst possible blanks. 2 couple friends stopped returning my calls. My neighbor texted me asking if Chloe was okay, and you could tell he'd already picked a side. Reputation damage in Rochester sticks. A small medical office complex in Henrietta that I'd been plowing for 3 seasons dropped us. The office manager called Kevin and said they were going in a different direction. No explanation, but the timing lined up with one of Chloe's posts about feeling safe again. That contract was worth $4,800. Gone. Kevin picked up a replacement account within 2 weeks, a strip mall in Greece. Not the same revenue, but it kept the route schedule full. The hearing on the temporary order happened 3 weeks later. My attorney presented the full, unedited audio from the kitchen recording. We'd compelled production of the complete file through discovery, and Chloe apparently hadn't considered that the unedited version would tell a very different story than her clipped excerpt. It showed her initiating the confrontation, blocking the hallway, and escalating her volume while I de-escalated and left. It showed the 6-minute gap between me walking out and her texting Olivia that she was scared. The judge vacated the order. I moved back into the house that weekend, but I didn't unpack much. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a place where 2 people avoided each other until the lawyers sorted it out. Mediation was held at a neutral office downtown. Bad coffee, long table, fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look exhausted. My side was me, Sarah, and David. Chloe's side was her and Brendan Riley, who walked in looking like he already knew how this was going to end, but hadn't told his client yet. The mediator started with assets. Riley presented Chloe's claim for equitable distribution of inherited assets valued at $1.8 million. He spoke for about 5 minutes, referencing New York domestic relations law, arguing the inheritance was received during the marriage and had been used to support the marital lifestyle. Then Sarah opened her binder. She walked through the trust instrument, irrevocable structure, independent trustee, spendthrift clause, spousal exclusion provision. She explained that the LLC interests were owned by the trust, not by me, that I had no legal title to the underlying assets, that every distribution was a restricted gift administered by the trustee, not marital property under New York law. Riley tried to pivot. He argued that the trust distributions had effectively subsidized our household expenses, which meant they had been functionally commingled into the marriage. Sarah pulled a ledger showing every trust disbursement for the past 3 years. Each one went to a restricted account managed by the trustee, earmarked for pre-approved categories. Not a single dollar had ever touched our joint account or any account Chloe had access to. Nothing was commingled because nothing was ever mixed. Riley shifted again. He argued that I had de facto control over the trust because I made requests to the trustee about which bills to pay. David shut that down flat. He explained that requesting a distribution is not the same as controlling assets. The trustee had sole discretion to approve or deny. 2 requests had actually been denied in the past year. I didn't control anything. I asked, and someone else decided. Then Riley tried the lifestyle argument. He said the trust's existence allowed me to maintain a lower personal income on paper while the trust quietly covered major expenses, which artificially suppressed the marital asset pool. It was his strongest point, and you could see Chloe perk up a little when he made it. But Sarah had the numbers ready. She showed that my declared personal income from the business, separate from the trust, covered our rent, groceries, utilities, and joint expenses. The trust's restricted disbursements went to things like my truck insurance and equipment-related costs. Nothing that benefited Chloe or the household. Sarah set her pen down after the last rebuttal and said, "To be direct, Mr. Riley, the beneficiary does not own these assets. The trust does. There is no marital interest here. There is nothing to divide." Riley leaned back in his chair. He stopped flipping through his notes and said, "I think we've covered the trust issue sufficiently." That was him folding. Everyone in that room knew it. Chloe was looking at him, waiting for the next move, and he wouldn't look back at her. That's when I knew he'd been carrying her confidence this whole time, feeding her a version of events where the trust would crack under pressure. And he just watched it not crack. Chloe leaned over and whispered something to him. He shook his head once, barely perceptible. She whispered again, more insistent. He put his hand flat on the table and said quietly, but loud enough for the room, that they'd need a moment. The mediator gave them 5 minutes. When they came back, Riley's tie was loosened a 1/4 inch, and Chloe's eyes were red. Not crying, but you could tell somebody had just explained reality to her for the first time. The mediator reviewed the documents. He asked David a few technical questions. David answered them in the same flat tone he probably uses when explaining property tax assessments. Then the mediator asked Chloe directly what marital assets she believed were subject to division. She looked at Riley. He said nothing. The joint checking account balance, when the settlement figures were calculated, was $6,824. Chloe's half was $3,412. She was also entitled to half the value of shared personal property. Some furniture, a TV, kitchen stuff. No real estate because we rented. No retirement accounts of real value. My business was a sole proprietorship, and its net value after equipment depreciation and liabilities was negligible on paper. The trust assets were off the table entirely. Chloe stared at the number. $3,412. She'd spent months planning for $700,000. She'd quit selling houses for 2 months to focus on the divorce. She drained my business account, gotten me removed from my home, torched my reputation with half our social circle, and retained an attorney she was spending Thursday evenings with. All of that for $3,412 and half a living room set. The room was quiet for a long time, and Chloe was doing something I'd never seen her do in 4 years of marriage. She was sitting completely still. The woman who always had a next move, who always had something to say, had nothing left. She'd been counting on $700,000 for months. And now she was staring at the real number. Settlement was finalized 4 weeks later. Chloe walked away with her half of the checking account, her car, her personal belongings, and a share of the credit card debt. She'd run up. She asked for temporary spousal support. The judge denied it, noting she was a licensed broker associate with an active license and no documented inability to work. I didn't walk away clean either. Legal fees totaled just over $11,000. I lost the backup plow. My vendor relationship was strained. I'd spent 3 weeks sleeping on a cot in my own shop and lost a commercial contract because of rumors. I lost weight. I wasn't sleeping well. Kevin carried more than his share to keep things running, and I owe him more than I'll ever be able to pay back. I did give Kevin a raise effective the first payroll after the settlement cleared, 10%. He tried to talk me down, which is the most Kevin thing I've ever seen. I also found out later that during those 3 weeks at the shop, he'd been picking up my route callbacks on his personal phone so clients wouldn't know anything was off, telling them I was handling a family situation and would be back in touch soon. Covered every single one. He never mentioned it. Jessica told me. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I was at the shop on a Saturday afternoon, doing equipment maintenance with Kevin. We were pulling a hydraulic cylinder off a plow frame when I heard the front door open. I wiped my hands and walked out to the front office. Chloe was standing there. No appointment, no call. Just standing in the doorway with a manila folder in her hand, looking like she'd practiced this in the car, but wasn't sure it was going to work. She said the bank was refusing to process the removal of her name from a business line of credit she'd been attached to as a spouse guarantor. She needed my signature on a release form. Without it, the obligation showed on her credit report, and she couldn't qualify for a new apartment lease. She set the folder on the counter and slid it toward me. She started explaining the urgency, using my name a lot, the way she does when she's working someone. Then she said she needed this handled by Monday. She said she'd already lost 2 apartments over this, and if it didn't clear, she had nothing lined up. She said she knew things got messy. Then she said something that almost made me laugh. She said she always believed in what we had. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. She was doing the thing she always did, reading the room, adjusting her pitch, finding the angle. Except the room was a shop that smelled like hydraulic fluid, and the person she was pitching had already closed that account permanently. I picked up the folder, closed it, and set it on the edge of the desk. Send it to Sarah. She'll process it if it's appropriate. Chloe opened her mouth to say something else. I turned around and walked back into the equipment bay. Kevin was already back under the plow frame. He didn't look up. He didn't ask. I picked up the wrench and got back to work. I heard the front door close about 30 seconds later. After we finished the cylinder job, I drove out to the cemetery where my dad is buried. I stood there silently for a while. I didn't need to say anything. He'd already said everything that mattered years ago. This story, the betrayal, the fight, and the cold, hard justice of it all, makes me wonder, what would you have done if you found yourself in a situation like this? And do you think the final outcome was truly justified, for all the pain it caused? Let me know in the comments below.